So yesterday, of course, we covered the post-Lincoln presidents, and that's what the bell ringer was about today in the Canvas chat. The videos in the video assignment, where you had to pick two of the videos and enter in 10 pieces of evidence and 5 interpretations for each of them. Those are all about various parts of the executive branch, including the bureaucracy and the cabinet and stuff like that, because the executive branch is more than just the President of the United States. And in today's notes, we'll talk about the people that help the president, as it says up there on the screen, and what exactly they do for him. So, of course, earlier in the notes, we already covered things like the actual presidency and the qualifications and how they lead. And we talked about the different presidents. And today we'll look at the different people that help them. And typically, when we look at the executive branch and all the government workforce, that's called either the civil service or the bureaucracy, and includes a lot of different people. But we're just going to concentrate on a few of them in particular. First of all, the White House staff is one of the group of people that helps the president. The White House staff that includes the most significant position that you'll often see in the news, and that would be the chief of staff. The chief of staff. They're the person who organizes the president's agenda and keeps them on task. Some presidents rely on them heavily, some do not. And another position that's in the White House staff that we often see is the press secretary. That's a person who answers questions of journalists. They stay in the room with a big blue drape and the White House seal behind them. The press secretary. And then the president has thousands of other employees that work both in the Oval Office area, the West Wing, and also across the street in what's called the Executive Office Building. So he has over 1,000 employees that work with him all together. And of course, who is in the executive branch? Well, obviously, the Vice President of the United States. In the past, they've only been used to what's called balance the ticket. So if the presidential candidate is from the north, the vice presidential candidate would be from the south or east and west, old or young, and so on. But since World War II, as we mentioned when we got to Harry Truman decided to start including them more in decision making and at least some of the national security meetings that they would have. And so, especially probably the last 4 vice presidents in particular have become much more involved than others had long ago. So the vice president is part of that. And then there's also the 14 cabinet departments. 14 cabinet departments. And the people in charge of them are secretaries, except for one case. The Justice Department, they call that person the Attorney General. And they involve a wide variety of activities. Probably the most prominent of them would be the State Department, which involves diplomacy, defense, which is self-explanatory. It used to be called the War Department, but they decided to change that. Treasury, another self-explanatory one. And then the fourth of the big ones would be the Justice Department. And like I said, that is led by someone called the Attorney General. So it's the only one that's not a secretary. But then also helping the president in the executive branch should be independent agencies, like the FBI and the CIA. And so the question is, what do these cabinet departments and these agencies do? Well, they basically are in charge of specific government employees. So the Secretary of Defense oversees all the people that work in the Pentagon and the branches of the military. The Secretary of the Interior is in charge of people that deal with the environment and, for instance, the national parks. So they all cover specific areas. And then what is the bureaucracy itself? And that, whenever you hear that term, that is just referring to the workforce of the government. So all government employees are technically bureaucrats. We used to hire bureaucrats through what was called the patronage system. Patronage. What does that mean? It means that whoever won the presidency, or if it was the state government, whoever won the governorship, they basically got to hire whomever they wanted. So if a Republican got elected, they'd have a lot of people fired and only Republicans hired. And if a Democrat got elected, then they would fire most of the people and only hire Democrats. It used to also be called the spoil system because the phrase was, to the victor belongs the spoils. The problem with that, well, one of the benefits, of course, is the government employees would all be loyal to the person that got elected. The downside is many of them would be bad at their jobs. Yes.
Their worldview is also narrow.
Yes. So they didn't necessarily take anyone else into consideration when doing their government work.
They didn't take knowledge from outside sources.
Yes. And so this system existed for a considerable period of time until the 1870s. And then it was altered and replaced with what we call the civil service system. And so that's the next question up there. What makes a good government? So what is the difference between the patronage system and the civil service system? Well, it involves an application process to get a job, which includes testing. You probably heard of the civil service test before. It also relies on job performance. So not necessarily how loyal you are to the president or to the governor of your state, but how good you are at your actual job. And it also relies a lot on seniority because, unfortunately, when pay is decided arbitrarily by the person in charge, they're obviously only going to give raises to people they think that are going to agree with them. So instead, they rely on seniority instead. And they try to make sure, of course, that the employees are neutral, so they're not taking sides. So that way they can run the government on a day-to-day basis as best they can. So they usually specialize on specific things, like I mentioned with the cabinet departments. They do all have a chain of command, so there's always a different layer. They get smaller and smaller as you move up to the cabinet secretaries. They have specific rules that go along with their jobs that they have to follow. Like I said, they're impartial, and they get their jobs and promotions based on merit, how hard they work. So that includes over 1 million federal employees, and there's thousands of state employees in their executive branches. For instance, under the governor of Pennsylvania, the state has its own Treasury Department, for instance, and State Department, and state police, Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. There's sometimes specific agencies, but all those fall under the executive branch under the governor of the state. And of course, that's different state to state. Some states have different agencies and departments. So that's all the notes for today. We'll finish up tomorrow with the other executives. We'll talk about what they are in more detail at the state and local level, and then what they look like in some other countries. But for the remainder of today, you can continue to work on the videos or the reading or the president's activity that we started yesterday. You can work on that as well. So any of those things that you'd like to work on, you can complete at this time.